Well, thank you, Shawn. Thank you, Shawn, for such a powerful and a passionate presentation from his own experience for the last 20 or 30 years, 25 years of work. Now we have 30 minutes, exactly 30 minutes for questions and answers. Who wanted to start? Here we go. From first row. Introduce yourself. Microphone is coming to you.
Good afternoon. I'm Heather Jeffen, and when I was in Kuwait, we realized a lot of deficiency in vitamin A. Yet available in the market, there was a lot of carrot, sweet potato, etc. The problem was they could not change the habit, their style of living, and change the eating habit. And that was the major obstacle. I mean, you can take the horse to the water, but you cannot make them drink unless something else. This is one of the obstacles of achieving step-up nutrition.
Thank you. Second question. Oh, a couple of them. Marie, do you want to wait? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, Marie Ruel from IFPRI. I'd like to take you up on the challenge you mentioned at the end, that we need to do better at translating knowledge into action on the ground. And of course, this is something that researchers struggle with and that program implementers struggle with. Who are the people that can really help us? If it's not the researchers, if it's not the program implementers, who is in between to make sure that this knowledge translates into action? And which knowledge should programs listen to? There's a lot of knowledge being generated. Nobody knows what to do with this mountain of information. It took 10 years to get to the 1,000-day. There was a lot of research coming, no, not a lot, sorry. There was very convincing research about the fact that kids benefit more from interventions during the first 3 years. But the programs were not willing to change, and the researchers were not making the link with the implementers. So if you have any wise advice on how to do it and who should be at the center of this translation.
Okay, that's great. There's another one there.
Thank you, Shawn. And again, this was a brilliant and powerful message. I would like to come back. Oh, by the way, my name is Serin Jen, and I worked a long time with Shawn in West Africa through the help of USAID here. You mentioned the capacity, and I think one of the major challenge in the nutrition area is how do we get enough capacity on the ground. And I know, and you know, that there has been some initiative in trying to beef up the capacity of countries to get more nutritionists on the ground. But I'm not sure if the nutritionists are the only or the main cadre we need. I was thinking, how do we get nutrition done by other than the nutritionists to get more, I think, leverage technically on the ground? I just wanted you to comment on that. Thank you.
Good point. Okay. Well, let me introduce Mira. She is one of the panel members who selected Shawn for this year's lectureship. Okay, thank you, Mira.
Thank you, Sheng, and thank you, Shawn, and apologies for being late. Thanks, Shawn, for a really powerful talk, as always. I'm wondering, how come you don't mention one of the challenges, which we heard last week and we've heard over and over again from the governments, which is the challenge of crowding in resources, particularly for the government, whether it is for capacity development or for translating research or whatever, or scaling up programs, until we can crowd in resources, and not just for NGOs and for research, but really resources for delivering these interventions at scale by governments and for governments. I think we have a challenge. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you.
And I also want to reiterate the comment that Serin made. Really, I think that's a really important issue to think about.
Yes. Okay, Shawn, you have 4 questions. You have behavior change. We're moving from knowledge to actual people's action, and the resources for nutrition, as well as the capacity, right? Actually, it's not just capacity. How we are going to integrate nutrition to the non-nutritionists. I think that's a very good point. I think the best economists should know to the non-economists to know the value of the economics. That's one of the first sentences I learned from my professor in Minnesota, Werner Ruthan. Shawn.
Yes, leave it to my dearest friends to pose me such easy questions. The example about foods being available but not consumed, I don't know that specific context, but to me this illustrates perhaps what I see as the bigger thing, is that behavior change communication in general, I don't think has been taken with the seriousness and the rigor that it merits. And it's not just in nutrition, but because so much of what we want to do in nutrition is incredibly dependent on effective behavior change communication strategies. There certainly, I think, are some more serious investments about how do we really deploy these sorts of strategies. So that, to me, is one part of the response. I think the other part is a bit of reverse engineering, of understanding people's diets first before you embark on introducing new foodstuffs and what's actually going to be acceptable. I always go back of, people will say uptake of new items or new technology can be so difficult, but then you look at cell phones have taken over all of Africa. So, I think if we actually are making, promoting products that responds to people's needs, if we understand that, there is a diffusion. So I think there are different pieces of that. Marie, such an easy question you ask.
She always asks easy questions.
I do think one thing that is useful is, and as you know, I will say this, is actually to be very purposeful in forging relationships between research organization and implementing organizations, because I do think that implementing organizations are often that critical bridge to get the best knowledge into practice. And if they're on board, not as the researchers, but in tight collaboration with the researchers, you're actually getting a leg up. And also making sure that when you're actually setting up research, you're building in some sort of a consultative body that's not just other researchers, but also either program implementers or policymakers, so that people are buying in earlier on in the process. Because I think often when one does research, you worry about your peers as other researchers and their opinions, etc. And if you can actually engage that community that actually will be the end user of those results earlier, not necessarily to comment on the design, but to walk them through what you're doing so they actually can buy into the results earlier. I think those are some ways that one can make the take-up quicker. Capacity building. To me, it's not a question of deploying just nutritionists. I think we need to look at the systems that are delivering and what are the nutrition competencies we need where. I think if you take the health system, some of the first quick wins are actually making sure your curricula, nursing schools, public health schools, faculties of medicine actually have correct nutrition baggage in them. I mean, the number of times we've been involved in doing quote-unquote refresher courses for health workers who in fact have just graduated from pre-service training, this is one way to really then infuse the entire system with the nutrition competencies. You will need some dedicated nutritionists, I think, at bachelor's, master's, and doctoral level. But the idea is not to mystify nutrition, but actually to demystify and mainstream. And I think any other sector you would do very similar, be the agricultural sector, really analyze within the system what are the competencies different people who have contact with the populations we're trying to serve or are making decisions of the system need, and you're working behind the scenes to get those curricula modified. I think it's also, we often come at it from a training aspect, but I think it's really much about human resource planning. And again, if you go back to the HIV agenda, people didn't just throw money on the ground. There were huge purposeful investments in in capacity building. Now, sometimes they actually stole capacity from other vital sectors, which I don't think we want to repeat. So they're also negative. I mean, there are lessons to be learned from that. Mira, I think you actually came in later than my point, because that was, if I go back to my notes, one of my first things. And to me, this is where, again, Dr. Forman was this remarkable type of leadership we need to clone throughout the system, of that political astuteness to actually put nutrition on the political agenda and turn those political commitments into true financial resources, human resources on the ground. And I do think that's one of the biggest challenges we face right now, is that this huge energy, but if we are not able to fuel that energy with both the financial and human resources to make a difference, we won't have moved far. And we might not have another chance like this in our lifetime, so don't feel the pressure.
Okay, let's go to the second round. There you go.
I'm Lane Vanderslice with the World Hunger Education Service. I basically would like your reaction to two different points, and the second one may take a little elaboration. First of all, I think really the elephant in the room on nutrition is that people don't have enough money to buy food, and it's just simple, not enough, having enough income. And I don't think you're going to be able to alleviate it in certain ways, but that is the issue. So that's one. And then the second thing is sort of, in some ways, the bodies have enough. I mean, UNICEF and IFPRI, I mean, not necessarily IFPRI, but AID, for example, have enough money. It's really, or they have as much money as they're going to get, and it's really a question of how they allocate it. I mean, I've been paying attention to this since 1985. I was with Bread for the World, and along with Jim Grant, et cetera, we started the Child Survival Fund. And AID health funding was about $100 million and maybe a little bit more. It just increased vastly because we have paid attention to it every year. And of course, including the vitamin A funding. I don't know whether you run into Ernie Wilkinson, but anyway, that's enough. But aid, and then I left and went on to do something else in about 92. But AID had an earmark for health and had a hell of a lot of money for health. So in my view, they also had enough money, as much money as they were going to have to carry out nutrition intervention. My question is, well, is UNICEF, et cetera, making the right decisions about how they're spending their money? Because there is a limited amount of funds.
Okay. Now, David, you're talking to somebody. You still remember your question?
David Lambert, ISU. You've touched on this, but any further insights? The essence of the question is, where is the nutrition function most effectively placed within an organization? If you could re-envision our United Nations family, its architecture, the role in the U.S. government, if you were asked to be an advisor for a new government in Africa and setting up their ministries, could you give any further insight on that?
Issue of nutrition? Okay.
I actually...
Okay, there's one.
Hi, Shawn. Al Bartlett, formerly with USAID and Save the Children, now retired. Thank you for a very powerful synthesis, and also for saving me having to ask the question, what do you say to a minister when he asks you, how do I turn money and political commitment into impact at scale? That's the important question that's on the table. I wanted to follow up on Marie's point and your points about translation and about research focused on how we achieve that impact at scale. Recently at Save the Children, back in February, we had a meeting that included the MCH folks from the Gates Foundation, USAID, NIH, AHRQ, and the RAND Corporation, and some other NGOs, focused on the issue of establishing or thinking about criteria for evaluating the quality of translational implementation program-based evidence. Because we were coming out of the experience with the USAID evidence summits, where as they looked at the reviews of evidence and realizing that USAID's real strength was in implementation, tried to take that part of their strength and bring it into the mainstream. But all of the systematic reviews that graded evidence were based on things like the grade criteria that basically require effectively an RCT, a randomized controlled trial, both for good quality by their rating and also for basically for publication. So the incentives and what we have available as graded evidence comes from a kind of research that isn't really the best kind of research for implementation. And so we wanted to begin to talk together about how we might set standards both for grading program-based evidence, because there's a lot of information from programs, some of it's junk, some of it's really good. How do you grade it? And more importantly, how do you design effective program-based evidence development that is both credible and transferable? So that process is going to continue, and I just wondered whether it sounds as though the nutrition community would be very much interested in potentially participating in that effort as it goes forward. And I just wanted to put that on the table for you.
Very good. Shawn, maybe we just begin to address these 3 questions before we have another round.
Okay, thank you. The question of what are the economic constraints to actually have an inadequate diet, they're certainly real. I don't think they're the only ones. I mean, I will come back to breastfeeding, and my sister-in-law accuses me of being obsessed by breasts. I say, no, I'm not obsessed by breasts, I'm obsessed by breastfeeding, and it's an evidence-based obsession. You know, there's not the economic issue, and have we done what we need to do to scale it up? Iron folic acid supplementation, that's not an economic constraint. I surely think that we've not done enough to address the economic constraints of moms and kids, but that's not the only thing. I do think that sometimes actually moving forward on the complementary feeding agenda, it's that it's also been because we've not taken the courage to really say, well, what truly are the economic constraints and how can we help resolve them? But economic interventions, and I'm not an economist, Shingen, I'm sorry. The world's a better place for it, though. You know, without understanding those constraints, I do think that we're not doing as well as we should. But economic growth alone, we also know, is not going to have optimal nutrition intervention. So I think it's finding what is the right combination. Allocation, doing the right things. I would first come back, to me this links very much to the science of how. I mean, we program implementers can be very mule-headed, and it's like, we've been doing this program for 30 years, we're just going to keep doing the right thing. And I do think but most of us actually want to do the right thing, and I think if we can actually embed useful research that we have bought into these programs to demonstrate why they actually could do, if you tweak it like this or like this, it could have a much more effective impact. That can be extremely useful. Will the overall, I think that there's been such a sea change in the realities of control of resources, though, whereas before, the donors were the source of funding. That is still the case in some countries. You go into a Burkina Faso, that might still be hugely important. But you go to an India, and so I'm going to speak of a country I know absolutely nothing about, any donor funding is what? Mira, it's less than 0.1% probably. So but the public sector resources going into what are allegedly nutrition interventions are monstrous and just got a lot bigger with the last vote in Parliament. So, I think that we also need to think, if we're on the donor side, of how to invest far more catalytically of really getting these high-level political decisions informed by the best evidence available. Now, as in any situation, you're up against political realities, but you need to start that dialogue and generate the evidence about how those can be leveraged better. And even if they're donor resources, increasingly, if it's a debt relief program, in fact, the country's in the driver's seat. If it's going to be borrowing money from Mira, the countries are in the driver's seat. So I think building that capacity at the country level to understand the problems better and make the right investment decisions. On the donor side, we certainly need to do that, but it's far more important that that's happening at the country level. Where is the nutrition function? In my simple-minded view of the world, I think you have to have a high-level nutrition function, but that's a coordination function. And you need to make each sector do more for nutrition. I've seen unintended negative consequences of where you create an overarching nutrition secretariat that then sucks up all the resources and actually eviscerates nutrition capacity and actually provides camouflage. And so now the Ministry of Health can say, oh, we don't do that. The new Nutrition Bureau does it. And I think it's actually undermining. So I think it has to have the highest level political leadership, but that has to be very much a coordination and accountability role. The health sector absolutely has to be delivering some nutrition interventions. The agricultural sector has to be accountable for certain nutrition outcomes. But to create some parallel structure, again, I think a structure that can do the high-level coordination and ensure accountability is incredibly important. But I've seen several examples of where, in the hopes of actually making a better coordination structure, that structure has actually then started to be an implementer or a resource mobilizer for its own existence, and I think that's counterproductive. In terms of this delivery science, I absolutely agree. I think that, I think there needs to be, there are two things I would say that it is a different sort of research, and I don't think that means it's less rigorous. I think it's then defining what do we mean by rigor, because also if we're diluting that body of research with sloppy studies, we're in fact discrediting it. So I think it's really defining what does quality look like in that universe, and having, I think, because the danger we also want to avoid is having, I guess, what I would call effectiveness research being mixed up with efficacy research when you're setting global standards, because there sometimes can be a confusion.
Okay.
So those are my...
Yeah, as an economist, I think we should be blamed for some of the failures. We used to look at the economic model of policies to maximize GDP. Then we assume that higher GDP growth will be translated into better nutrition and health outcome. That's a neoclassical model. But that has not worked. With the case of India, despite 8% economic growth for the last decade or so, until 2 years ago. But the hunger level, malnutrition level remain very high. So that assumption that higher economic growth will lead to the improvement of malnutrition, the reduction of malnutrition and hunger, is not true in many countries. So certain sort of non-economic policies is needed to fix the market failure. Okay, so let's go for the last round. We just group all the questions together. Okay, here you go.
Hi, my name is Ray Galloway from the MCHIP project. I just coming from the International Congress of Nutrition last week, one of the take-home messages for me was that you don't want to give an intervention to somebody who doesn't need it. And in fact, some of the studies that were presented probably had less of an effect because it was diluted, because it was given to people, kids, for example, that didn't really need the intervention. So my question is, can we do a better job at targeting our interventions to people who really need it? Would that help would that be more expensive or would that be less expensive? We tend to say in nutrition, everybody should have the intervention. And I think in some cases that does hold. But I think that we need to take a look at that a little bit more about, who's replete and who isn't replete in some of these micronutrients particularly.
Okay, there's another hand just behind her. Okay, all right. Hi,
Thank you.
Nice to see you here.
Pleasure to see you again. Thank you, Shawn, for your presentation. My question is around your constraint number 4, leveraging other sectors. My name is Gabriel Liza. I work for the FAO, by the way. My question is, how do you improve communication and coordination between those who are working on nutrition versus those who are working on agriculture? Maybe because there is no communication, there's some mistrust. That's why people are publishing and publishing and publishing more versus sitting and talking and comparing notes and doing something together. Could you comment on that, please?
Right. Okay. Thank you. Any questions from this side? Okay, there's one.
David Ute from Save the Children, and thanks again, Shawn, for your presentation. I think I'm probably in the minority in being old enough to have lived through the first and the golden age of nutrition back in the 70s. Though there were a few of us here. I went off to Pakistan in 1976 with my spouse, Jean Baker, whom some of you know, and I was immediately handed a portfolio of 5 bilateral nutrition projects, including 3 fortification projects, including one that was rather interesting, fortification of tea with vitamin A. And I bet most of you haven't heard about that, but we had a relationship with with MIT and the International Nutrition Program at MIT that resulted, among other things, in the establishment of a national nutrition planning cell, sometimes affectionately referred to as a nut cell in Pakistan. But the point is that it was a period of time when an enormous amount of attention was being focused on nutrition. And very high level attention from government counterparts. And yet, this was followed by a period of almost, I would say, 20 years when it seems as though we either lost ground or we certainly didn't gain ground. And I think it's worth reflecting a bit on why that happened and what we need to do differently going forward. There were some reasons why I think we didn't gain more ground. And it's a moment in time as I see it right now. I mean, I think we have an opportunity here to really do things that need to be done and haven't been done over an extended period of time. So I'd appreciate your thoughts on what we could do different and better as we move forward.
Thank you. I might ask you a question later. Do the women or children drink tea, fortified teas? If not, then it will not be covered. Anyway, Shawn. This is the last round of questions.
Okay, thank you. Ray, to your question, do a better job at targeting. I'll actually come back to, I think, what was my 5th point, is that one of the constraints to targeting is that we have such miserable measurement instruments for many things. I don't think there is a blanket answer. I mean, certainly, globally, we've done some more targeting, so we've understood, well, we really need to focus on 1,000 days. That's some targeting. I think if you look at a program like vitamin A supplementation, what might be, I think it becomes a very pragmatic choice. So you could have a country that was diverse enough that there'd be certain regions where you didn't need it any longer and other regions you did. But then you would really have to look at, is it actually more difficult to do a patchwork approach to vitamin A supplementation versus just going ahead and doing the national campaign, which is partly also doing things like deworming and vaccination. So I think it would be, they're the real constraints of, do we actually have good measurement technologies and methods to get the fine-tuned targeting so we could do more targeting. And then you have to cross that with sort of a pragmatic approach of where for a given intervention, is that actually a cost-saving approach or not? I think we do have at least one universal, which is breastfeeding with timely initiation, exclusive breastfeeding, and breastfeeding through the first 2 years. So I agree with you. I think we're actually moving into an era where we're getting much more complex context specificity, and we need to understand that better. And if we don't have better data, we can't work with that. Leveraging other sectors, collaboration, particularly with agriculture. If I step back, I think that one of the most fundamental problems is actually a structural problem. The health sector, whether it does it well or not, at least is accountable for actually delivering services to the poor and most disadvantaged, delivering services to moms because when they're vessels of children, we don't really care about them much elsewhere, but they're responsible for things like child mortality, maternal mortality. Typically, what is the public sector, agriculture sector accountable for? Not nutritional status. It's responsible for things like the national food balance sheet and the national GDP. So there has to be, I think, if we truly are going to make inroads with having agriculture be more nutrition sensitive, we also need to change some of these accountability mechanisms. I try to think of myself in the shoes of a frontline agriculture extension worker, and I'm being told, well, go work with these smallholder women farmers, but in fact what we're going to judge you on is the maize yield in your district. It's like, well, so we need to decide, and then we need to actually then make the systemic changes so we can have agriculture deliver what we want to deliver. In terms of communication, I think there's vastly more communication now than there was, but I would, again, that word of caution. There was a golden age when we were taking this far more seriously, and for some reason, we lost track, we lost ground, and I think we need to rejuvenate that. But I absolutely agree there needs to be more communication. I do think it's extremely important, looking back to the 1970s, when era where there was far more nutrition money on the table. Why did we not sustain that? I do think that one of the problems we always face in nutrition, that aside from the emaciated child in a famine, it's not something that resonates. And you go into a country where 60% of the kids are stunted, well, that's just the norm. So it's not, it's the invisibility of it. And I'm not sure that, and so to me, if you don't actually have some sort of sustained public outrage about an issue, it's not going to stay on the political agenda. And we've never, and unless it's, and I think that's one of the things in 2008, all of a sudden everybody was sensitive about food, because everybody, be it you sitting in Alexandria or you be sitting in Abuja, everybody's food bill was going up. So it sort of resonated with everybody. So I think we also need to see, how do we actually get our technical knowledge about nutrition, undernutrition's impacts on children's lives, moms' lives, and their futures, translate into something that's meaningful. I do think that's actually very interesting, where the 1,000-day concept, both from a technical epidemiological standpoint, but also from, you feel it in your guts. Anybody who's been around kids, raised kids, you know it in your, you don't need to know it intellectually. You know in your guts that, this is a very special period when mom's pregnant in the first 2 years of life. So I think it's an incredibly forceful communication tool. And we need to build that sense of ownership and of nutrition much more broadly, and not have it just be an intellectual exercise.
Well, thank you, Shawn. I'm not going to just summarize what has been discussed. I just wanted to highlight what I learned from this discussion, which is very rich. Just for your information, IFPRI was established in 1975. Part of the reason is because Kissinger made his speech in Rome. I don't know, I need to dig out this document, whether Dr. Forman also mentioned about the importance of policy in food security. So IFPRI was set up because of that speech. Well, largely, not all. Now, another questions I raised here: capacity, the integration of other sectors to nutrition, high-level political commitment, accountability from the government. So all these are very important. Now, IFPRI, just about 2 years ago, launched a global initiative linking agriculture to health and nutrition. Agriculture is a traditional strength of CGIAR. But in the meantime, we realized that without a clear purpose, objectives of agriculture sector, then we lose direction. So this program is designed to address that gap. So how we can really use agriculture as an instrument to address malnutrition issues. Obviously, malnutrition involves so many sectors, but agriculture plays a huge role there. Under this program, we have 4 components. The first component is to integrate nutrition to the whole value chain. So not just look at the nutrition in the final dining table. We look at the nutrition from the very beginning. What seeds we're going to choose, and what crops we're going to grow, and the farming practices, harvesting, processing, to final consumption, the whole value chain. I think Helen Keller International has also been working on that issue as well. The second component is biofortification. I think you mentioned about supplementation, vitamin A pills and so on. All these are very important. But I think there is a great opportunity to look at the potential benefits through breeding. So can we add micronutrients, vitamin A's, iron, or zinc, not just vitamin A's, into different crops? I think it's Howdy is sitting there. So he's leading one of the very exciting programs, so biofortification, to really use breeding to integrate nutrition into different crops. And we have achieved some successes. The third component is food safety, agriculture-related diseases. This is actually very important. Why is that? Many children lose nutrients because of their health problem, diarrhea or other sickness. So tremendous amount of nutrients have been lost because of the health. And many health problems are related to agriculture. And on top of that, any other kind of non-food related disease like avian influenza that also affects people's health directly. Now the last component, many people have mentioned here about the policy and the programs. How can we really integrate nutrition to policy and programs? So starting from planning, Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Finance, the final objective of our economic development should people's health and nutrition, not GDP. It's very abstract. What is GDP? So we need to change our mind. Use nutrition, health as our final outcome in our planning, agricultural planning, finance, and beyond. And make the government officials accountable for nutrition outcome, not rice self-sufficiency, wheat self-sufficiency, or food self-sufficiency. So nutrition and health. Then program. Yes, I know lots of people are implementing different programs, agriculture programs, development programs on the ground. How can we really integrate nutrition there? So this is a very exciting program. John McDermott is not here. He is a director. And Shawn, actually, you are one of the members of our advisory committee, right? Yes. It's a very large program. Many people sitting in this room are involved. So we are really looking for your partnership, your advice, your inputs into this program. And we are committed. And we are pushing others to commit to this great effort. But in the meantime, we are committed. And myself is one of the converted, not necessarily nutritionist, as something or somebody who begin to understand nutrition. So your inputs, your advice, your commitment will be very important to make this program succeed. Now, I wanted to thank Dr. Forman's family members here, and also our selection committee panels, and of course, Shawn. Shawn, thank you so much. Let's give him a round of applause.